Hello and welcome to another edition of Terrible Business Advice. I'm Neil Stoneham, and today we're going to be covering quite a thorny issue, one that reaches across business and the geopolitical world. The idea of never show weakness. Is that good advice or is it terrible advice? Well, here to discuss that with me is Andy Fisher. He describes himself as the co-founder and chief happiness officer at the Happy Consultancy Group, which is a global training company with a difference. And his mission, he says, is to help inspire happier workplaces around the world using the drivers of happiness and positive psychology as the foundation of all our work. So how exactly does this play into the idea of never show weakness? Andy's got a lot to say about the issue, as have I. So enjoy. Right, hello Andy. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Neil. It's great to be here. Very excited.
Okay. Yeah, and I think we've got a really good topic that we want to discuss today. I think this topic that you're about to announce is very pertinent in today's society, particularly with what's been happening recently in global politics. So, you've given advice, lots of advice over the years. You've worked in the UK, you've worked in Malaysia. I'm sure you've worked in the Middle East. So you've been around, you've given lots of
Been
advice, I'm
around.
sure, about that kind of thing. So, but
Yeah,
you're going to tell me about a terrible piece of advice today, which is?
it's something that's really close to my heart and provokes very strong emotions within me, and that's around never show weakness, Neil. That
Right.
that age-old advice that we should never show weakness. We should kind of like man up.
So yeah, it's a really pertinent issue at the moment. But of course, there's a lot of people in the world, a lot of top leaders, business leaders, and political leaders that are really, following that advice. Never show weakness. They want to show strength. They want to be able to, to tell people what to do or what's going to happen. There's not really much room for dialogue. It's
Mhm.
more sort of monologue, isn't it, with a lot of these people. So you tell me why you think this is bad advice. Never show
Oh,
weakness.
right. I don't even know where to start with this one because it just goes against everything that I believe in. Before I kind of give, or actually, no, I'll give why I think it's bad advice, all right? Because at its core, not showing weakness is actually going against our very being, I believe. Kind
Mm,
of like the approach that I take in life, and I'm not even talking about work, I'm just talking about life, is very humanistic, okay? And it's about kind of like understanding yourself, knowing your kind of your strengths, and knowing who you are, kind of because that's when the authentic person comes through. So I just think if you suffocate that whatever it is within us that we call weakness, you're suffocating a bit of your being. And so therefore, you will never ever be your true authentic self. And I absolutely believe that you have to have that within you. You have to be authentic because it's authenticity that builds trust. It's authenticity that kind of like connects with people. And it's authenticity that kind of sort of gets you through life, really, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So when you're not kind of being those things, when you're shared to show weakness, you're being inauthentic, which people can't connect with. And then that then has this kind of like rolling effect. This in terms of as a leader, if you're not being kind of authentic at work, then it's really hard to create a great place to work. It's really hard to create a psychologically safe place to work for people. And it's really closed-minded as well. Like, how the hell do we grow as people if we kind of like put these barriers and constraints upon ourselves? That's a bad thing to do. So that was a very long answer, but as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about the subject, and that's what I truly believe why it's bad advice.
Yeah, and I would totally echo that, and especially about this idea of authenticity, because it's not just the fact that you're coming across as inauthentic when you're trying to be the strong man or the strong woman, and not showing any kind of vulnerability at all. It's the fact that within yourself, you're creating pressures because you've always got to keep this facade. All right, so you
Yeah,
not only can use, you're sort of preventing yourself from connecting authentically with other people, but you're building that pressure in yourself to act and be this person that you're not.
yeah,
Um, of
exactly.
course, as well with trying to show strength all the time. I mean, there is the danger that you're going to come across as a bit bullying or authoritarian.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
of
yeah, of
course, I
course.
mean, you've probably you've worked with a lot of organizations over the years, haven't you? Have you ever worked with a company that seems to be projecting that, we are all about strength. We don't want to, we kind of walk all over people. We don't care what we need to do to be successful. We'll do it. And then that's had negative consequences.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's still a really, really common problem. And I think the reason being is I call what you were just talking about, I call it putting on the brave man's mask, okay? But when you put on the brave man mask, it creates like an invisible barrier. And I go back to the human thing, kind of, the one thing human beings are brilliant at is reading each other. Like it's those kind of like micro behaviors that we do. We learn that naturally through life. So when we start kind of suppressing some of those things, people aren't stupid. They pick up on it. Um, I want to be fair to people that are scared to show weakness as well, and put on that brave persona as well, because it is about kind of like we feel like sometimes we need to protect ourselves. Okay, so going back to your question around kind of leaders in the business, yeah, we see it all the time, right? Both you and I. And we've seen kind of like the impact of great leaders that are really authentic and open and create that environment, and the impact of the ones that don't. And the ones that don't, it's just, in my opinion, it's driven by that insecurity. We all have fears. In fact, as human beings, there's a brilliant piece of kind of work and research that was done over the years called the human element. And it identified these three core fears that we have as people. And that's the fear of being ignored, rejected, or humiliated. So if you think about that, if you think that kind of like inside of us is this thing that's forever worrying about being rejected or ignored or humiliated, we need to overcome that. And sometimes kind of people overplay that. And you mentioned confidence, you can overplay confidence and then it comes across as arrogant, sometimes bullying. And then, so this is the space that a lot of leaders play. It's not that they're intentionally kind of want to be those things, but it's a way of protecting themselves so they don't demonstrate those fears. But they do it in a way that is very much overplayed. And that has consequences because kind of people then kind of feel attacked. And that doesn't create a great environment, or kind of like the relationship never gets built between leader and team. And then that has consequences as well in terms of kind of like how people feel about working in that environment. So yeah, see it all the time. And I'm sure you do too, Neil.
I've worked for various different types of leaders in the past. So some have been, I wouldn't necessarily say they're the classic strongman, but they certainly are the kind of leader that makes the decisions and then tells people what to do. And you're
Mhm.
expected to follow it. There's very little dialogue. And a lot of people are scared to come up with ideas
Mhm.
or to challenge certain ideas which might be bad. So, whilst there's a certain amount of discipline,
Mhm.
there's also, a situation where people don't feel they can grow because they feel they don't have the space to grow. They don't feel that they're able to put out their ideas in a way that's going to be welcomed. They just
Yeah.
feel that, they've just got to be done, do what they're told.
Mhm.
And in that case, I was a teacher. I was working in what was essentially a very good school. I mean, there were lots of really good teachers, but I felt that I couldn't grow in that environment, that I had lots of ideas, lots of things I wanted to do. And yet, because of the style of leadership, I didn't feel able to do them. And so I ended up leaving that school and going to a new one where the management style was very, very different. It was much
Yeah.
more sort of open, and the leaders, were more interested in ideas. They weren't too bothered about their egos and all this kind of thing. And as a result, I did actually do some of those things I wanted to do in the first school, and then it was, I felt much more fulfilled, and I grew as a teacher and a person. And that was so that's that there were two contrasts there, and I think the difference between the first and the second one is the second one I was trusted.
Yeah.
So I just feel so.
Absolutely.
Have you got any similar stories to follow, particularly
Yeah,
in terms of
absolutely.
those that say never show weakness? I mean, trying to project this image of strength all the time.
Mhm. Yeah, I have millions of examples, and I see it every day in kind of the places that I work with, and but for me, I know I had some really interesting conversations, particularly here in Malaysia with a couple of clients around kind of the subject of weakness, and I think part of it for me is the word itself and its perception, because a lot of the leaders that kind of put on that brave man mask as I talked about and go in from that position of power, authority, because they want to look strong. They perceive weakness as a really, really negative thing. okay? Because that is kind of, that's a place um kind of, you know, not having kind of the strength, not having kind of the ability to kind of influence people. I will influence through power. Whereas if you think about the word in a really more positive light, and that is, you know, and where I come from is it's more about kind of like, I don't know everything, okay? And I am open to kind of learn. And the best people to learn from are other people, right? The good, the bad, and the ugly. So kind of like, it's weakness for me is a self-awareness of kind of trying new, being able of giving myself the confidence and giving myself the space to try new things, to admit I don't know things as well, because with that opens up a door of collaboration and as you say, kind of like trust as well. So for me, I just think we need to challenge that word weakness within ourselves and not see it as the negative thing that some people do, but see it as the opportunity to open up a door to try new things. And you mentioned growth of quite a few times there. You know, it is the opportunity to grow and develop and, you know, kind of like fill in the gaps of our kind of like personal human toolkit, so that we just get better and better, not just as a leader, but as a person.
I'm just thinking now about those leaders who might be listening to this, and they like to present an image of strength because again, it creates that confidence within their team. That's probably the way they would look at it. You know, if I can show that I'm in charge and that I'm in control and that I know what I'm doing, then my team will have confidence in me. If I start to show vulnerabilities, if I start to show weaknesses, and I acknowledge those weaknesses in front of people, then that actually reduces that confidence amongst my team. So what would you say to that?
Yeah, it's a really great point. I mean, you just have to look at kind of the world and global leaders. You know, Elon Musk has been all over the news. He always is. He has been kind of recently because of the elections and stuff like that. And then there's other people like kind of VJ Malia and stuff like that. These are people that through putting on the mask and coming from a position of authority or not admitting mistakes have literally crumbled. You know, Kingfisher Airlines just crumbled because the integrity of that whole company and covering up mistakes and having the inability to show that vulnerable side and go, you know, we're cocking up here and we need to sort things out. You know, kind of like that has a kind of a knock-on effect when you just keep on covering things up. My business partner would say, sort of putting whipped cream on a, I'm going to say moldy cake. She doesn't quite say that. But you know, when you just keep covering things up, there comes a point where it's irrecoverable. But with a bit of vulnerability, and a bit of kind of honesty, you know, I've faced challenges in my life, and my personal approach to it is sometimes they're brand new challenges. I have no idea. I have no idea how to tackle this. I know I will overcome it, but I don't know in that moment. And so if it means kind of like sitting with my team saying, we're facing this challenge, okay? And this has happened a few times, and it's like, you know, and it's a new challenge. And I don't know all of the answers just yet. But together we will find them. All of a sudden, by your approach and your behavior, you're engaging your team, you're winning them over, and you're getting that compassion and that support. Because I think as a leader, that's really important as well. You know, a lot of the time when we sort of like think that we can do things alone and we have to be strong and people expect us to do this, that's a lonely place to be. You know, the best places and the most thriving places and the most kind of on a personal level where I get really energized is when we kind of open up and we make it a matter of collaboration. We do this together. You know, we admit that kind of, or we play to each other's strengths. You know, I can't do this, but I know you can. So, you know, together, you know, we will get kind of, we will find a solution to this. That's where I see kind of the power of vulnerability and demonstrating weakness in a positive way, because you get that kind of real collaborative intention amongst people.
So yeah, that's really interesting. Have you got an example, a specific example of a time where you've taken this approach? It's very collegiate, isn't it? It's kind of like it's not me in charge and I know what I'm doing and you will do what I want you to do. It's that I need your input here. I need you to help me kind of overcome this issue
Yeah,
or face this challenge. I mean, have you got a specific example of that?
I kind of. I've got a kind of like, I like to just kind of like twist it slightly and kind of bring it to showing vulnerability to kind of win over and progress in something, so it is kind of the same thing. But and I learned this really early in my career, okay, because sort of like, I think during all of our careers and kind of, we're on this kind of learning curve, aren't we? We're kind of, when we're young, we're kind of learn new things, and I walked into an environment, the corporate world, very much with sort of like that whole pressure to hide any weaknesses, be professional, be strong. And there was a real perception of what that meant. Okay. But it didn't serve me. Okay. I tried, because that was going back to kind of those insecurities and those fears. I wanted to fit in. I didn't want to stand out. I was only in my 20s, and, I wanted to just kind of go with the flow of, and the corporate culture that was. And I remember kind of, there was when I first started in the training kind of world and the learning development world, in my sort of very first company, we were running a big conference, a learning conference, and it was the launch of a new style of service for a very, very well-known global airline that I used to work for. And it was kind of about 150, 200 frontline kind of sort of colleagues, some that worked on the ground, some that flew, and whatever. Anyway, when we started to talk about this new style of service, it caused uproar, right? It was at a time where kind of things were quite tense as a company. And as you can imagine, it was like, how do you expect me to do this? Management, this, company, that, customers, this, I haven't got the tools to do the job. It nearly broke into a fight. But more importantly, everybody was being really disrespectful to each other. It became kind of chaos. And I was kind of new, and I didn't know, it was through pure luck, really, or kind of just instinct, I don't know. But I thought, this is getting out of hand. I don't know how, I'm new as a facilitator. I don't know how to handle this situation. Do I just tell everyone to shut up? Do I stop? Anyway, what I did do, kind of, there was a psychology to the style of service that we were talking about. So I just thought, put your big boy pants on, Andy, and just face up to this, in the best way that you think. So there I was on stage, all mic'd up. And I said, right, so like I said, I used a technique called the first truth first, which I think is a brilliant one for any leaders that's scared to kind of approach the world of vulnerability. And that is just, in order to connect with people in the moment, tell them how you're feeling, And so I did. And I just said, right, we're not going to carry on. I said, I need to tell you how I'm feeling right now. I said, sort of like, you're kind of totally disrespecting kind of me, my colleagues, and the effort kind of that has been put into this day. I said, we all work together. Okay. And at the moment, you're talking and you're approaching and behaving like we're all enemies. And I said, more importantly, I want to bring you to the focus of what we are talking about. We're talking about kind of delivering service with genuine interest for each other. We're talking about kind of delivering service that makes people feel warm and welcomed and respected. We're talking about kind of delivering a service where we build connections with each other. And I said, every single one of you in this room right now is absolutely doing the opposite. And I said, inside, and once again, the vulnerability thing, inside, I feel awful. I feel nervous. I feel scared. I've never faced this situation. But at the forefront of what I'm doing is I want to role model these things. So if any of you can tell me today that I haven't made you feel warm and welcome, I haven't showed genuine interest in the ones that I've, talked to, if I haven't built kind of close connections and relationships in the short time that we've had together, then you need to tell me, because I'm not doing my job. I said, do I want to walk out of here right now? Absolutely. Am I going to? Absolutely not. But I need you to know that because my job is to deliver this service style to all of you. I got a round of applause, a standing ovation, actually. But more importantly, it was a real grounding moment. Through my vulnerability and kind of showing and sharing and being open in a honest way. And I felt really confident when I was doing it. As I was approaching, I didn't. But as I started talking, I thought, this is the right thing to do. So that confidence came through. And like I say, it just managed that situation in the moment. And the rest of the day was great. The rest of the day was respectful. The rest of the day was full of learning. Yeah, so that's a real personal example. And I remember it being a real turning point for me, as in the power of just being open and vulnerable and honest with people, and not in a submissive way, not in an oversharing way, but just in a way that kind of helps manage the situation and connects with people. So it worked for me.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic example, isn't it, of how you actually, because I would say, listening to that story, that yes, you were showing some vulnerability, but you were also showing some strength because you had the confidence. I mean, I must have, I
Yeah.
do admire you for having the confidence to stand up there and say that to this group of people, especially when you said you were in your 20s right at the time,
I
so
was, yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
younger man than today.
One of my first
But
facilitation gigs, yeah.
right, okay. So, the fact that you managed to sort of think in the moment, but show that strength in a way as well, to be able to have the confidence to say to people, this isn't working, and actually to be very direct about why that was.
Yeah,
And clearly, given the response at the end, they respected that. So
yeah,
it was that, you were showing strength, but you were also showing that vulnerability and that honesty. And it seems to me that's what won the day. So if
yeah.
you just went in there and just said, this is a terrible situation. I really don't like what's happening here. I'm feeling very uncomfortable, and you guys need to sort yourself out. Otherwise, there's no point in us going on. That would have had a very different reaction, wouldn't it?
It would. And, that goes back to what you were saying about how so many leaders do approach things, right? As in authority, power, kind of dictatorial. And it's like, and that's what they were used to. So I think kind of part of what I did was the power of surprise as well. They weren't expecting it, this is a group of people, cabin crew in particular, because they're sort of people that work away a lot of the time. So kind of relationships with managers, they don't get a lot of time. Kind of that relationship building part isn't there. And so kind of a lot of the time, because they are away a lot, they never felt kind of really heard. They'd have issues about a flight or about whatever it may be. And it was always just, logged and filed away and stuff like that, but never felt. So for me, this was a build up from them of those years of not feeling listened to and being told what to do and not being empowered or kind of whatever. So this is a very different style that I don't think many of them had seen before. And it kind of shocked them or surprised them. But in a way that they felt respected as well. They felt listened to, and they felt like their door was open, where we have this adult two-way kind of collaboration and conversation with each other to kind of like work through it. So yeah, it worked at that time, and I've used it ever since when I've needed to. Not as bad as that, but I've never had to
Yeah.
deal with a group like that before. But
And I
yeah,
found sometimes in my life and professional career as well that some of the biggest moments, the turning points in the way you do things, happens on the spur of the moment. You've got no time to prepare. You've got to do it right in the spur of the moment. And if
yeah,
your attitude again is to be dictatorial and tell people what to do, you're less likely to be successful than if you have that
yeah,
balance. I would
exactly.
say there was a balance there, wasn't there? That's what you
Mm.
really need to achieve. Nobody's saying you have to go around to showing weakness all the time and showing your vulnerabilities, because then I think that does have a negative effect. You are going to
Yeah.
show you're going to be too weak. Then you've got to have some level of confidence especially in
Yeah,
leadership.
absolutely.
So I
Confidence
think
underpins all, yeah. Confidence, sorry, Neil, to interrupt,
yeah,
but confidence does underpin all of this, right? Like confidence, you mentioned trust earlier. Confidence is then, for me, about having trust in yourself, right? Which then
mm,
drives the behavior. And one part of that story that's missing, which I think is really, really important for all of us as well, in terms of when we're really self-aware and we know our strengths and we know our development areas, is then the ability to be open to kind of like learn from other people. And I had the most amazing role model leader at the time who ran the training academy. Once again, like I said, I was new into the department, and it was her I drew inspiration from. And I even remember, even though it was many, many years ago, I remember thinking in my head, what would Caroline do? Right? Because she was that much of a mentor and a role model. And so that's kind of where my approach came from. But working kind of on a daily basis in the training academy, she was one that was kind of really, really super open. She had time for people whenever there was a challenge, and there was often many, many challenges kind of in that kind of environment. She would bring it to the table and just, like I mentioned before, she said, I actually don't know all the answers to this. You're the ones that fly, you're the ones that work at the airport. Let's come in and discuss this together. She never had to come from a point of, I know it all, because that would have been a failure. And she wouldn't have won the crowd over either to kind of support, collaborate, and help. So her kind of, she was always one of openness and kind of open the doors and collaborate with people and, you know, and kind of listen to them. So that's kind of where I got the inspiration from. So being surrounded by people like that as well, which I think, you
Yeah.
know, we should all do.
Yeah, and I think both of us have been around a bit. We've been on the planet for a while, and we've talked to people all the time, and then obviously when you're talking to friends and colleagues, they often talk about their leaders in one of two ways. They either really admire them and they really like working for them, and
Yeah.
then I would say in almost 100% of cases, they're like you've just described. They're the
Mhm.
people that have the confidence to lead. They know, they're in control, but at the same time, they're working with their colleagues. They're working alongside people. They're not just dictating things
Mhm.
all the time. I don't think I've ever heard anybody say, "Oh, I love this. I love my leader because he just knows what he's doing and he tells or she tells us what to do." And we just kind of follow along, and it's nice and easy, and it's a very nice
Yeah.
environment. That
Yeah.
never happens. Nobody ever speaks about people in those kind of terms. But
No.
I just want to touch on this point because you mentioned Elon Musk earlier, and I thought we might get to him at some point because in some ways he's the kind of perfect example at the moment of somebody who, clearly doesn't really listen to people. The word is out there is this is coming from a place of insecurity as well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
demolishing things because he thinks this is just how to go about it. Now, some people are obviously an Elon Musk fans, and they say, well, he's getting stuff done. We just take this other approach. It takes forever to get anything done. We need to have the strong people to come along and kind of bulldoze things that aren't working and just, make things happen. And so I'm really interested in what your thoughts are on this. Why do you think we're in a position now in the world where the thinking generally, certainly in the West, is that the strong approach, the never show weakness approach, is actually gaining traction. It's instead of being challenged, it's actually becoming more pertinent for a certain group of people. I mean, why do you think that's happened?
It's a really interesting question, Neil, and I'm going to challenge that kind of like it might be getting traction, but the more it's certainly in my world and the people that I deal with, actually kind of the less it's getting traction, the more kind of balance of, I mean, emotional intelligence is being talked about for a number of years, right? But I do happily see kind of more and more kind of emotionally intelligent leaders coming through and understanding the importance of kind of human connection and stuff like that. But if we go back to your question, why is it? There's also, we live in a world, and this is my own kind of personal feelings, we live in a world where kind of it's fast, it's quick, we want everything now. And I think one of the things that we have lost as humankind is patience, you know, because everything is so ready and available. And if it's not, I don't want it, I'll go somewhere else to get it, you know, kind of put very broadly. You know, have great faith that sort of like there are a lot of leaders that kind of over the years with emotional intelligence and have brought that into the workplace. Okay. But then sort of like there are just people that use that position of power, that position of authority, that position of financial authority as well, to kind of sort of like to do what they think they, well, not do what they think, do what they want to do without thinking about the consequences. And so, but kind of if you look at the life cycle of kind of leadership and stuff like that, there have, you know, been so many sort of like trends, and some of them have been kind of very dictatorial, very authoritarian, and some of them kind of haven't. They've been the opposite way. But when you look at kind of that life cycle, in the moments in time where we have seen dictatorship and that kind of approach, kind of like um, there's been a 180-degree switch shortly afterwards, however period of time that is, whether it's a generation, whether it's kind of several generations, but then there's been a switch because the consequences of being like that is, you know, you're leaving kind of people behind, you're creating toxicity, you're kind of like not building kind of human connection and human growth and all of those things. You know, it's just one person's view or one kind of way. So when that has happened in the past, you know, there seems to be a cycle that follows where it's kind of very much the opposite, which is where emotional intelligence came through. You know, and you look at leaders like kind of Howard Schultz, for example, at Starbucks, and he was someone through his own admittance, and if you read his brilliant book as well, and many leaders like him, where they lived in a generational time where they were very kind of sort of like very much point the finger, do this is the way to do it, and made loads of mistakes and lost millions of pounds as well. The difference with people like that is they stopped, they took note, and they went, and they kind of looked behind them and went, look at that path of destruction that I have left. I need to learn from this. And, sort of like, and with the whole emotional intelligence approach, kind of bringing that into the fore and going, how can I learn from this? I need to talk to the people. So this was the beginning of the whole employee engagement movement, where you actually start, God forbid, talking to your people, finding out what they want, finding out kind of kind of their ideas and thoughts to kind of overcome challenges and their solutions, and what makes a great workplace. So, for me, that's the difference. There are leaders that just do it because they can, they have that power, they stand on their power pedestal without thinking about the consequences. Then there are other great leaders that we can learn from that kind of have done that, but then go and stop and kind of what can I learn and actually kind of like learn from those mistakes and move on. So yeah, so there are, and unfortunately, kind of like the social media and the news does put the spotlight on people like Elon Musk, but I live in a world, my own world, where I don't focus on those people. I said that I learn nothing from, well, actually, I learn lots from them about how not to be. But I like to focus on the people that are changing the world for a positive force in a positive way, and kind of use those as my role models. And there's millions of them out there. So that's why I was challenging you about kind of like your sort of like, it seems to be kind of like getting momentum around kind of this strength and this power. No, I also see a very different side to that in the world that I look at, which is very positive.
Okay, well, that cheers me up.
Yeah.
But I think it's a really interesting point, actually, because there is this danger that we kind of see all the noise that comes from social media and the mainstream media as well, that sort of bigs up these people, because of course they're the most powerful people in the
Yeah,
world,
exactly.
and so they're naturally going to get all this attention. But we mustn't confuse that with the fact that everybody now wants to be like that. There are, of course, the community of people who do want to be like this. But I agree with you. I think a lot of people on the ground, when you meet people face to face daily, they don't want to be like this. They're taking a very different approach, and they're seeing the success of that. And
Yeah.
also this idea of consequences. I mean, it seems to be a lot of these kind of strongmen, and I use that phrase because it's the one that people use, isn't it? Strongman mentality. They just leave a trail of destruction. I mean, some
Mm.
things might get better as by default, but generally speaking, and we've seen what happened with Twitter. Twitter
Mm.
is a shadow of what it used to be, and it's
Yeah,
always a bit of a
absolutely.
cesspit, wasn't it? But it's unusable now for me, and for a
Mhm.
lot of other people as well, and people are leaving it in droves. So that's the consequences of having someone like Elon Musk
Yeah,
come
absolutely.
in, and
You
we'll
and
see what.
that's sort of like comparable to kind of what people do in business, right? When they don't agree with something and stuff, they leave, or they leave in their droves. So people have left Twitter, but people, and and this is what I love about the world. This is one of the real positives I see is kind of the power shift. I feel is very much now kind of like more in the hands of the common people like ourselves, like me, like you, like everybody else. It's not kind of those big people on that pedestal with the spotlight on them, but actually kind of the world is really shifting and changing because that shift is now kind of in our hands. We have the power, the everyday person has the power to kind of influence, which I love, and I think, if it wasn't for kind of that power shift, we wouldn't see such a change in things like sustainability and the environment and community. But, that's been driven by a generation of people going, absolutely, we have to do something about this, not just talk
Yeah.
about it, we have to take action on this. Yeah, so kind of I'm really happy to see, and I hope that the trend continues where that power shift kind of continues to be in the hands of the every person.
Yes, and I think that that's definitely happening, even though it's not necessarily acknowledged by a lot of
Yeah,
people. It's the day to day on the ground.
yeah.
People are not necessarily aligning with some of the more toxic messages that are coming from these
Oh,
type of
exactly.
leaders. So that's
Exactly.
that's hope, gives a bit of hope, hopefully.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Great. Okay. So yeah, we covered so much ground there, and I think we've turned, we've looked at why this is bad advice, and thought about instead what do we do? How do we show strength, but in a way that's human, basically, that takes other people's ideas into account, getting things done, yes, but
Mhm.
also trying to be as diplomatic as possible and listening to other people's views without trying to get too bogged down in that. And of course, we've acknowledged the fact that too much vulnerability, too much trying to listen to everybody isn't going to work either. I think that's the other extreme, isn't it? But if you can get somewhere in
Yeah.
the middle, then that's ideal, isn't it? Really, because you learn too, and I think the best leaders always acknowledge that they learn. They're always learning. They never completely stop learning and they think they know everything and they've reached their peak. There are some people who refuse to admit that. They
Yeah,
think, I
no, no,
don't know. I mean,
absolutely.
you'll have come, we're both been in the training space. We've both come across people who say, "Oh, I don't need to learn this. I'm good enough at this. Look at me. I'm a successful leader. I've got, my company's earning all this money."
Yeah.
And yet, the best leaders acknowledge that they do need to learn. So great, lots of stuff there. So I like to finish the podcast just by asking my guest about some advice that maybe you've given, some business advice you've given in the past that you now regret giving because you've learned better. Your experience now has taught you otherwise.
Yeah. Um, can I give you two bits of advice? Because there's one that
Yeah.
really changed me. And so I'll give kind of certainly give advice that I've given, which was absolutely awful because I gave no context to it. But also kind of one that's given to me. And I think I'd like to share it just because it has literally shaped the person I am, even though those occasions started, when I was in my childhood. And I remember literally I was in a park and I fell over and I cut my knee and I cried. Okay. And I remember my dad coming up to me and kind of like whipping me off the ground quite aggressively, I may add, and just said, "Oh, will you man up?" Okay. So, and I just remember that phrase, like I'm not necessarily at the time, it didn't kind of stay with me, but kind of in my adulthood. Because my mum had a very different approach. And I remember her reaction to that was kind of like, "Oh, darling, kind of let it out. If you want to cry, cry," and all of that. But the lesson I learned from that, why that was such bad advice, like man up, because what I've learned in my kind of career and my adulthood is how awful that advice is. For me, kind of that is about anding up, right? Because words and phrases and commands like man up, they keep people small. This is what the people we were talking about earlier in those power kind of in those positions of power. They use phrases like that to keep people small so they look bigger. Okay. And that doesn't, from an individual point of view, sort of like, I don't want to be kept small. I want to kind of have the strength and the confidence to be the person that I want to be, the best person, the most authentic person. But the more kind of like in life that we hear, "Oh, man up, oh, grow up, oh, do this, oh, do that." Okay. It's just all about is the other person's insecurities to keep us small. Okay, it doesn't support us, it doesn't help us. So I remember that kind of, it wasn't really advice, but it was just a phrase that I've heard like over the years so many times. And it's like having the confidence to break through that and go, "No, I'm not going to man up. I'm going to Andy up. I'm going to kneel up. I'm going to kind of find who I am." So kind of that was something that stuck with me, but kind of advice that I used to, and I still do, but I give it context, but I used to give people all the time is if they had like a challenge at work or a situation or they're struggling with their manager and they've done, or a friend has done something to kind of, upset them and it's playing on their mind, I used to go, "Oh, just let it go. Just let it go. It'll be fine. Let it go." That would be my advice. Okay. What I didn't realize was, how at the times that I used to give that, kind of how difficult it is to let something go. You know, as in kind of you can kind of say I'm going to let it go and ignore it, but actually what you need to let go of is the kind of the emotional side of letting it go. Yeah. So there's one thing going, "Yeah, I'm going to let it go." But if it's staying with you, if it's still giving you sleepless nights, and I wasn't in the kind of the place of experience or kind of like or authority or kind of like or any way to really kind of help them. So I used to blatantly and blazingly use this kind of like, "Oh, just let it go," as if that was a really easy thing to do. And people go, "Okay, yeah, just let it go, yeah." And then kind of see them a few months later and notice that they're still holding on to kind of the emotional side of whatever had happened to them. So kind of I don't use it as often as I do, but when I do, it's like it's followed up by kind of like, what is it that's really kind of upsetting you? Have you addressed this issue? Have you gone and faced the person, and had the conversation around, this is how you've made me feel? Okay, because that's how you let someone go. All right.
Yeah.
So it's about not using these phrases in a kind of very blasé way, but actually giving people the tips and the tools and the techniques to let something go. I think is really important, which I never used to do, which is why it was really bad advice.
Good. So thanks for that bad advice, but which is also now good advice for people to do as well. I think I like a lot of this advice. I mean, never show weakness. In itself, it's too simplistic, isn't it? But the essence of it possibly does have some usefulness. And I think there's your example just there. Let it go is good advice in certain contexts, but not after. You got to deal with it first. Got to deal with the issue, then let it go.
Yeah.
Not just
Yeah.
ignore it and forget it and hope it goes away, because often it doesn't. So
Absolutely.
that's really
It's
interesting.
more than letting go of just kind of like the situation. It's having the ability to let go of the emotion that is driving the feelings that you have. So what people need to know. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, in the spirit of letting go, I think I need to let you go now because you're a busy man.
I don't want
But
to go. I'm enjoying this.
I'll bring you back. I'll bring you back to talk about another one. But that's been really good. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think a lot of people are going to take some really positive ideas and thoughts from this, especially people who are kind of feeling a bit vulnerable at the moment and sort of seeing the noise out there about, you've got to be strong, you've got to just sort of walk all over people, and seeing that, that's not necessarily going to be a good idea.
It's not at
And
all.
it's
Not at
actually all
all.
right to be a bit vulnerable sometimes and show that vulnerability within the right context. So
Yeah.
great. So
And
thanks so much, Andy.
no, thank you, Neil. It's been an absolute pleasure. And see you
All right.
soon.
Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
So there we go. Never show weakness, or maybe show a bit of weakness. Well, of course, that's entirely up to you, but I hope you found that helpful and maybe even a bit insightful as well. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss all the other episodes of this podcast. There are currently quite a few now that are online wherever you get your podcasts. The recent edition, we look at Fake It Till You Make It, which is quite an interesting one, especially for you budding entrepreneurs. So check that out as well. So thanks very much again for listening, and don't forget to give us a rating to help get the podcast out there. Ideally 5 stars, of course, because we know you love it. And we'll see you again on another edition of Terrible Business Advice. Bye-bye.